Humanists Take on the World, Episode 11. The Wall Takes Another Hit. Welcome to the episode of Humanists Take on the World. I'm Dustin, and it's just going to be me this time. Yeah, we're going on vacation, so we'll get to see my mom, and hopefully she's doing better, and heading up the Oregon coast. It's going to be nice getting out there again, and letting Kylie play on the beach, and just having some nice relaxing times. And life's moving along. For an update on my health, my blood pressure has come down enough that I actually stopped the medication. Second try on medications, and thanks to the diet, I've lost a bunch of weight, and my blood pressure's come down, and I stopped the medication. My blood pressure's still down, so that seems to be working out well. And so far pretty good. Yeah, with gas prices though, going on a road trip, yeah, that's going to be expensive, but that's okay. We've got my old car. Well, old now. I've had it since 2013, and it's a 2006 Volkswagen Jetta TDI. And while at this point I wouldn't buy a diesel because of the environmental stuff with them, we still have it. And being able to pull our little pop-up camper and getting nearly double the gas mileage as we do with our Hyundai Santa Fe, that will really help with fuel prices, despite diesel being 60 cents a gallon higher. So it should be a good time. It'll be nice getting back over into Oregon, getting to see family, and getting to relax by ourselves on the beach. So now it is time for the news story. All right, I'm breaking in before we get to the main topic, because after getting the episode all edited and exported out, the Supreme Court overturned Roe versus Wade. We knew it was going to happen. I, talked about all my thoughts on it a few episodes ago, but this is now real. In some states, abortion is now illegal. In other states, like Idaho, it'll be illegal in 30 days. If that's something you need, get it now. If you live in a state that is banning abortion and you need to get out, start taking those steps. And also have plans in place for where you need to go if you need basic reproductive care. That sucks. Clarence Thomas also wrote a concurring opinion calling out the need for them to overturn Griswold, Lawrence, and Obergefell. If those were to get overturned, then in a quarter to half of states, contraceptives and gay sex would be illegal, and same-sex marriages would be invalidated. This sucks. So now let's get to the news. So now let's get to what I previously recorded that's also talking about a stupid ruling from the Supreme Court this week. All right, the U.S. Supreme Court has taken another swing at the wall of separation of church and state. This would not be a surprise for anybody who remembers the 2020 opinion from the U.S. Supreme Court in Espinoza v. Montana Department of Revenue. So that case was about a private school scholarship program that only allowed those scholarships to be used at non-sectarian schools because the Montana state constitution, like a bunch of other state constitutions in the Intermountain West, when these states were forming while Mormons were trying to take over, have in it very strong wording about not ever using any public funds to support religion. And they ruled that, that ruling included that it's fine for a state to not subsidize private education, but if they do, then they can't disqualify some private schools just because they're religious. And that was the justification in John Roberts' majority opinion in a 6-3 ruling in Carson versus Macon, which was over Maine's rural school assistance program. So what was at issue here is Maine, despite being in the eastern United States, is quite rural. And there are some areas that do not actually have public schools. So the program was set up to allow people who live outside of a public school district to get assistance from the state to pay for private school funding or out-of-district public school funding. Because if you aren't a student in a public school district, you can't go to that district schools for free. You do have to actually pay some money out of pocket. When I was a little kid in far eastern Oregon, just barely over on the Oregon side of the Oregon-Idaho border, we were in Vail School District, but if we were across the road, we would have been in the Willow Creek School District. Now, the Willow Creek School District was just elementary school. They used Vail for middle school and high school, but the Willow Creek School District, some people liked that school better for elementary school who lived on the border because it was a much smaller school with a lot smaller class sizes because of how much smaller it was. Granted, it was so much smaller that it was 2 grades per class, but there were people in the neighborhood. We're talking farm country in Eastern Oregon. Neighborhood is a bizarre concept out there, but there were people around there who did pay a couple $100 a month to have their kids go to Willow Creek Elementary instead of Vail Elementary. The bigger school, and bigger in terms of, at that time, a farming town with 1,600 people in it. So that kind of stuff has always been around, and that's something that a lot of people in Maine utilize, where you don't actually have access to a public school that you're in district, can't afford to pay a couple $100, and because there isn't an option available, the state covers that money. Now, there are also cases where there isn't a public school available, but because it's in New England and there are a bunch of secular private schools there, a lot of them being prep schools for the Ivy League colleges, the state will fund that too. But the rule was they can't be sectarian. 2 families sued who qualified for this program, but they wanted to send their kids to religious schools. And they argued that not allowing them to send their kids to religious schools with the state assistance violated the Constitution. And the schools were Temple Academy and Bangor Christian Schools. Temple Academy, I don't know anything about, but Bangor Christian Schools would be in Bangor, Maine, which is a city, which that would be quite the drive if you're outside of a school district around one of Maine's largest cities. These schools very openly focus on teaching Christianity to their students. And as the Maine Attorney General included in his brief to the Supreme Court, both schools, quote, candidly admit that they discriminate against homosexuals, individuals who are transgender, and non-Christians with respect to both who they admit as students and who they hire as teachers and staff, end quote. And the Supreme Court ruling quoted the 2020 Espinoza v. Montana Department of Revenue case, saying that if you're granting scholarships or assistance for private education, you have to cover religious private education as well. Justice Stephen Breyer wrote the dissent, writing, quote, "We are today a nation of more than 330 million people who ascribe to over 100 different religions. In that context, state neutrality with respect to religion is particularly important. The religion clauses give Maine the right to honor that neutrality by choosing not to fund religious schools as part of its public school tuition program. I believe the majority is wrong to hold the contrary," end quote. Both sides are citing the First Amendment. Stephen Breyer is citing the Establishment Clause, while John Roberts is citing the Free Exercise Clause. Both claim to be supporting state neutrality on religion. There is absolutely a tension between the Establishment Clause and the Free Exercise Clause. And if you're not familiar with really what those mean, the Establishment Clause is Congress shall pass no law respecting the establishment of religion. That was written at a time when most states had an established church, where state tax money went to fund, was the budget for the church, for a particular church in each state. And when the First Amendment was passed and ratified, it was very much, Congress won't do that. By 1820, all states had gotten rid of their state-sponsored churches. And with the 14th Amendment, it was one of the First Amendment was one of the first amendments to be incorporated, as in ruled to apply to the states as well. And that means that state legislatures should not make any laws respecting the establishment of religion, and establishment of religion means the funding of churches. In this case, these schools are Christian ministries, and the Supreme Court has ruled that the state of Maine has to help fund Christian ministries. That is clearly a violation of the Establishment Clause. On the other hand, the Free Exercise Clause, nor prohibiting the free exercise thereof, is what it literally says in the First Amendment, saying that the state will help you pay tuition if you can't go to a public school, help pay tuition for a non-sectarian private school, does not restrict the free exercise of religion, despite what the Supreme Court ruled. That parents who are able to afford it are still free to pay for Christian school tuition. Most Christian schools have their own scholarship programs that are funded by members of the church. And because they're ministries, they often are able to get away with paying their teachers way less than public schools do. And as a result, they're able to keep their budgets way, way lower. Christian schools and other private schools as well also have the benefit of not having to provide services to everyone, just who they want. They do not have to provide special ed. They don't have to take care of difficult students. And anybody who doesn't fit in with the culture they're trying to create, they can get rid of. That includes unruly and difficult children. That includes disabled and autistic and mentally ill children. That includes kids with ADHD. And that includes kids who are gay, lesbian, bi, trans, non-binary, atheist, pagan, Jewish, Hindu, Muslim, you name it. And this is absolutely bullshit. I remember about 20 years ago hearing in the Adventist Church talk strongly against any government funding for Adventist schools. The big concern was at the point that you start accepting federal funds, then you start getting federal rules. Or if you start accepting state funds, you start having to follow state rules. That means you can't discriminate. That means you have to provide services to everybody. And they can't operate their ministries like that. In terms of this specific discussion, though, the important point is church schools 20 years ago knew they were incompatible with state funding. It is very unfortunate that the times have changed, that now they are. It has been a gradual process over the last 6-7 years with the Supreme Court taking a more and more accommodationist approach to religion, where instead of the state can only support a religious organization if it's supporting something that is entirely sectarian and provides a definite secular purpose and that there's no better options. The Lemon Test, that's how churches have been able to run state adoption services for so many years. And now the ruling has gone more and more towards if you're making money available to private entities, you can't exclude churches. It started with a playground. Playgrounds for daycares and preschools, and one that was at a church sued because they were denied because it was a ministry of a church on church property. And that started chiseling away at public funding for religious education being not a thing allowed in the United States. The next strike at that chisel was Espinoza, and now in Carson, we've got that brick in the wall of separation almost completely gone. By the time you factor in charter schools and how loose those programs are in so many states, and what kind of bullshit can pass as a publicly funded charter school, it would now be very difficult for states to resist directly funding private education now. The Supreme Court has made it very clear that they want that to happen. That they want kids to go to private schools, to private Christian schools, and to get more kids able to go to those, they want the state to help pick up the tab. That was a 6-3 ruling. Now, of course, my personal opinion is that private schools shouldn't exist at all. I went to Adventist schools from 3rd grade through a year of graduate study. I generally got a very high quality education, but there were gaping holes and copious amounts of misinformation. I was fortunate that my primary and secondary education was all in the state of Oregon, and that at the high school level, all education in Oregon, at least at the time, had to follow the state curriculum standards and use the same textbooks. So there at least was a safety net there on the quality of the education. In my schooling from 3rd grade through sophomore year of high school, most of my teachers were brand new to teaching or had only been teaching for a couple years. It was a 2 grade per class school. So 3rd and 4th grade was together, 4th and 5th were together, and so on. And I didn't have the same teacher 2 years in a row until 8th grade. And she was brand new out of college when I was in 7th grade. So very high teacher turnover. The principal was proud of how poorly he and his teachers were paid. And I was bullied continuously with my time in the school in Grants Pass. When you're in a class with 16 people and they all gang up on you, and that's not hyperbole. There were numerous cases where there was 2 or 3 girls sitting out while the rest were ganging up on me. And the school had no resources to handle that. The school nurse was not a nurse, at least not a licensed nurse in any way, and also worked as the librarian. We had a secretary who was part-time. Other than that, it was the principal and teachers. That was it. There was no extra staff for any services. That's what you get with private schools. They don't have to provide those services. They don't need to have any counseling. They don't need to have actually competent nurses. And they don't need to give a shit when kids are getting bullied. Now, I'm not saying that every public school is better, but public schools can be held to higher standards. because public schools can be held to standards. Private schools can't. Additionally, when you've got non-religious private schools, often they are the prep schools. You know, the college preparatory school. A lot of them have direct relationships and affiliations with Ivy League and other top-tier universities, and they charge very high tuitions. A lot of the religious schools also charge really high tuitions. And those are the ones who can provide better programs and services. But they are very selective about the quality of student they have. As a result, those kids all have a leg up when they get into higher education. It is part of the advantage that being in higher socioeconomic classes has on children. They can get higher quality education because teachers need to teach to the academic ability of the students they have. And if you've got only the cream of the crop, you only have to teach to the cream of the crop. If you're teaching to the general population, you have to teach to the average or below average of the general population. So they're able to teach at a higher level. Heck, even in my Adventist schools, I got a fair bit of that. My high school graduating class was 65. All but 3 went to college, and probably 60 out of the 55 graduated college. That is very, very much higher numbers than public schools have. But tuition was $10,000 a year. One of the things I observed was that parents weren't willing to pay the tuition on students who didn't do well, even though that tuition was usually subsidized. They just wouldn't bother. So across the Adventist church, the general numbers are about about half of the kids go to Adventist high schools. The other half go to public schools. I don't know what the numbers are for lower levels, but at least those were the numbers when I was in college. And without a doubt, the higher performing half, with few exceptions, are the ones that are going to the Adventist schools. And the lower performing half are the ones going to public schools. And that's even within a religious system that has a very large and very deep history with private education. When you can filter like that, it helps the rich do better while the poor do worse. There's also a little dirtier part with the Adventist Academy versus public school numbers is the Adventist Church is about 1/3 white, about 1/3 black, and about 1/3 Hispanic, and the rest is other races. The white kids are going to Adventist schools. Most of the rest are going to public schools, which helps make sure that it's white people that are getting to go to get theology degrees and go to the seminary and become pastors and stay in charge of the church. It also means that it's white people who are most likely to be going to the medical school and working in Adventist hospitals and other hospitals around the country. And when you get into the doctors and the physical therapy programs and the like, yeah, it's a way to help make sure white people have more money. It's a way of helping the rich stay rich while the poor stay poor. And the Supreme Court is endorsing that. And the fact that they're endorsing that is the least disturbing thing about this ruling. They're endorsing state-funded religious proselytizing to children. All right, listeners, here we are. At release, we're about halfway between Juneteenth and the 4th of July. Juneteenth is our newest federal holiday, established just last year, commemorating the end of slavery, the real end of slavery, when federal troops rolled into Galveston, Texas, or more accurately, rode into Galveston, Texas, and announced that these slaves were free. And the final slaves being held in the Confederacy were freed. And that was on the 19th of June, 1865. And June 19 got shortened down to Juneteenth. It has been known among the Black community, among a bunch of different names, one of which was America's second Independence Day, the day when the rest of America was free. And in another week, we will be reaching the 4th of July, the main American Independence Day. And it's easy right now to look at what the Supreme Court is doing and look at what Trump's lackeys are doing in Republican primaries and trying to take over election systems, and the upcoming overturning of Roe versus Wade and about half of states banning abortion and all of this stuff. It definitely sucks. And it's really easy to look at it all. And like with the economy and, gas prices going way up, and, rich people who can help the environment by getting electric cars aren't affected by higher gas prices, while all the poor people are. The poor and middle class have to pay the high gas prices. The rich don't. Looking at inflation and food prices going up, like fresh vegetables going up, the price of eggs almost doubling, a lot of stuff getting worse. Now, granted, that's all tied to some major systemic things. We've got housing issues across most of the country. It's also happening across most of the world. The 2008 recession caused housing markets to crash, and most people who worked in construction found other jobs because there was a huge surplus of housing. And this was all happening while millennials were coming of age and moving out of their parents' houses and needing homes. And there was basically no home construction for 7 years after that. Playing catch-up has been slow. The pandemic and inflation have made building prices really bad because the materials are way more expensive, and that makes it so that housing is more expensive to build. Then you add into it the rise of stuff like Airbnb and investors buying up a ton of housing, and it has created quite the housing crisis. You add in Black Lives Matter and basically no progress, like real progress has happened in regard to that. Yeah, there's more awareness. That's about it. Major reforms have only happened in one or two places. Looking at the upcoming election, it's looking like Republicans will seize control of the House and possibly the Senate, which means Congress will do even less than it is now. It's really hard to be proud to be an American right now. It seems like everything is falling apart. But if we look back at where we were, even just 10 years ago, when I started podcasting, atheists were being discriminated left and right. LGBTQ people had virtually no protections anywhere, and were fighting for some protections. Also, for the right to get married, but at least and also for more protections. That's all better. Yes, that could go away, but that is better. The issue with prayers in public schools and pastors in public schools and Bible studies in public schools, that has always been a thing. Yes, we've had progress. The landmark Supreme Court rulings in the 50s and 60s about that made huge progress. Some of the cases from 7, 8, and 10 years ago were making progress. We're at a point where it looks like we're taking a few steps back. That sucks. It really does. But there's still hope. When you look at the demographics, when you look at the numbers on religiosity, that has been in steady decline. When you look at how terrible the modern Republican Party is and how few votes they are actually getting. Since George H.W. Bush was elected in 1988. The only time a Republican got a majority of the popular vote for president was George W. Bush's 2004 reelection. When you look at Congress, Democrats have to win 55% of the national vote to be able to get control of the House of Representatives. And they've had it about half the time. The demographics are moving the right direction. While the Republican Party continues to lose its mind, and the Democratic Party has gotten pretty big tent, and realistically is quite moderate, it keeps growing. The baby boomers are getting older, and they are dying. Gen Z is starting to vote, and we will see major shifts when it's the millennials and Gen Z who are the major generational voting blocks. It's starting to happen. There is reason to be hopeful. Reason for caution is the people who were advising Trump on who to appoint to the Supreme Court were very careful to make sure it was the youngest possible people they could get him to get confirmed. And so Trump appointees will be on the court for the next 30 plus years. And it will take a very long time to get a not crazy right-wing Supreme Court. But it's not all bad. If you look around at the world, there are examples that are better. Looking at you, Scandinavia, you can also see examples that are way worse. Places where the conservative nationalist populism that Trump was promoting has gotten much more control and sway, like in Brazil and the Philippines, Hungary, Poland, Italy, and other countries around the world. England, the United Kingdom. So it's not just here. It's easy to look at the U.S. as the crumbling empire. There's also a reasonable way to look at the U.S. as a country that will be the phoenix rising from the ashes. And for a crumbling empire, the U.S. still holds a fair bit of sway and has very strong alliances. And despite it sucks right now. It sucks everywhere right now. But it will get better. That's it for this week. If you want to contact us, you can send us an email, a normal clear text email at contact@hdotw.com. You can send us an encrypted email to secure@hdotw.com. And the PGP key is available on Proton Mail Web Discovery Key Server. You can use the feedback form at hdotw.com/contact. You can call us and leave us a voicemail message at 208-996-8667. That's 208-996-8667. Or you can use the SpeakPipe button at hdotw.com/speakpipe. If you want to support the show, you can do so on a monthly basis with Patreon or just once with PayPal, credit, debit, Apple Pay, or Google Pay. And you can find the links at hdotw.com/donate. If you want to join into a discussion, which rarely happens amongst the community, you can find that on our Discord server at hdotw.com/discord. And until next time, remember, not all those who wander are lost, but goddamn am I looking forward to getting lost on the Oregon coast. I'm not actually going to get lost. I know exactly where I'm going, but I'm still looking forward to getting out there. So have a great 4th of July. If you're in the U.S., if you're in the Northern Hemisphere, happy summer. If you're in the Southern Hemisphere, happy winter. And yeah, that's it. Bye.